and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 94, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
Joe, or should I say Guten Tag, Ravi?
How are you doing? I should be in Germany at the moment, but we're pre-recording this show, but I'll be there for the Amiga 32 celebration. So there's 500 people coming and it's sold out. I can't believe it.
You've been munching on a Brockwurst right about now.
Oh, yeah, drinking
I can't
some
believe
nice
500
beer.
people are into it.
Yeah. The Amiga had a massive following over there, probably more so than here, actually, didn't
I'm
it?
joking.
Mate, go to Poland, Pixel World. It's like
So you
thousands,
get beaten up slagging the Amiga off out there.
I will do. Next event I'm at, somebody's going to just bang.
But you're taking a microphone out there with you?
Yeah, I'm going to have a show report from there, and I'm also going to Amsterdam and going to Marcel's Amiga warehouse, which is this guy. He bought up all the stock from all the old shops around Europe. So basically, this is a centre. He's got PlayStation display cabinets. He's got everything.
This is just going to be complete heaven for you, isn't it,
Oh,
Ravi?
total geek week, yeah.
I'm going to make sure I'm not on the show the week later.
If we never hear from Ravi again, he's just locked himself in.
Yeah,
I might never see him
that's
again. So if you're coming along to Amiga 32, if you're out there at the moment, maybe listening on your phone or something on the plane, then have an amazing weekend. We'll have a Ravi show report in a couple of weeks' time. Now, we've got a few letters this week on the show.
Oh, excellent.
We've done this for a while, the paper section. I missed this.
First time Joe's been here for a letter section.
No, he's seen
I've
paper
done the
before.
letter section.
It all blurs into one.
I remember last time we did it blew Joe's mind because he lives in a paperless office, you see.
Yes, there you go. I remember that.
God.
Now, the first one, I'm going to hand these pictures over because look where that listener is checking out the show this week.
Oh my gosh.
Look at that,
That's
look at that.
amazing.
A bit of Taj Mahal.
Oh wow. In Agra, in India.
Well, this
Holding.
is, well, if you want to I'll just quickly say beforehand, if you want to get a letter read out on the show, it's a bit old school, but we're an old school show. All you got to do is email show@theretrohour.com. We haven't got a PO box set up yet, have we, or anything like that? But
That would be fantastic.
Right to
Send your birthday cards into CBBC PO Box.
I'll write your answer on the back of a postcard. Or it was always a sealed down envelope, wasn't it, for competitions, I remember.
Yeah.
So this is Bart DeHar, who is a donator as well. He made the Hall of Fame a couple of weeks ago, remember? Nice to hear from you, Bart. And he says, cheers from India. He sent us a picture, listening with his earphones in outside the Taj Mahal. He said he downloaded some Retro Hour podcasts for travelling, and he's got a Raspberry Pi for gaming in the hotel room as well.
Oh my God.
That's pretty sick.
That is really cool. I'm so jealous. The Taj is just seeing a world wonder and having our Retro Hour podcast next to it. It's fantastic. Thanks, Bart.
You can see our logo on the phone there as well. Yeah, it's awesome. So we'll stick that on Facebook in a little gallery that we've got on there as well. Mike Wright's been in touch as well. Now, this might be one for you, Joe, because I know you're a bit of an RF head.
Yeah.
Now, he says, I've got a collection of about 8 consoles that use RF cables.
Yeah.
I'd like to have them all hooked up at once and switch to each one. Do you have any ideas of what I could use? Now, obviously, when we went to your place, we were quite appalled that you were using RF, I must say.
Yeah, you were.
Should have been SCART or, at least composite. But, if you are still using RF, like Joe, what method do you use then?
To be honest, I'm really, really old school, as you saw that day. And all of mine are all just... I ain't got a switch for it or anything. They're all just clipped nicely to the back of the units. And then they're all been labelled very nicely by my wife.
Oh, I forgot you labelled all the cables.
So all my
well,
cables, I've got little laminated labels on them, just saying what they are, and then they're all attached to the back of the unit, and then I just unplug them once at a time, which doesn't really help, Matt, unfortunately.
But if you've got a nice wife like Joe, is this what wives? I've been married a couple of weeks now. My wife hasn't done that.
Yeah, but that's because Sam doesn't like you.
Did she make you knit you a dust cover for the Amiga?
Actually, she did do that. It wasn't.
There you go. Ravi saves the day.
Yeah. She could stitch me an RF switch. But yeah, I mean, if I was to give advice on this, I'd say invest in like some nice SCART cables and a switch box because it's going to look nicer anyway.
I'll tell you what, I will invest in one. And then next time I'm on the show, I'll say which one I've got.
Joe will pass on his experience.
That's how retro I am.
Nice to hear from you, Mike. Peter's been on as well. He goes, Ravi mentioned he was looking for a good Mega Drive with HDMI. Now, he's actually sent us a YouTube video.
This is printed, Dan. How am I meant to...
I'm doing it.
Do you remember back in the day
God.
when you'd hear websites read out on TV and you'd have to type the URLs in?
Okay,
so don't forget this HTTP.
Yes.
Colon,
ignore all that. YouTube.com
/ www.youtube.be / capital O, capital K, XAM.
Joe's typing it as well.
I am, yeah.
2, capital W, WD, capital M.
next time,
then that should bring up.
send us a link.
Now,
I got it wrong.
Oh, Ravi, just copy it off the paper. Well, essentially what this is, you're on
Oh,
it, Joe.
no, mine didn't work either.
I'm sure you
on
read it
there.
out wrong.
I've got the paper.
You've
I've
got the paper and you still got it wrong. Well, essentially what this is, it's a modern version of the Mega Drive. The title of the video is something like Chinese Mega Drive knockoff, I think it is. And this does actually look, I mean, I only briefly saw the video a little bit earlier on. It looks a lot better than the At-Games one that got an official release in the shops, which might not be a hard thing to do. Everyone's quiet because we're all typing trying to find this.
No,
YouTube
I'm
video.
having a look at it
No,
now.
I can't do it.
The fake Chinese console, that's the one, yeah.
Okay, what's it look like?
It looks really nice, actually.
Do you want to gather around, Joe? Have a look.
I'll come over.
Yeah,
Taking the headset off.
It's got a
I'm
big,
coming out. I'm coming over.
it's got a big 16-bit written on it.
Okay. Does it look like the original Mega Drive?
Not at all, no.
All right. See, Joe is
Hello,
Mr. Mega
Ravi.
Drive.
Right.
Joe's sitting on his knee now just to paint the picture.
If it works well, and the ports, are they the same, Joe? The DB9 style?
What, on the front?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're the same. Yeah. It looks all right, to be fair.
Yeah.
Fast forward it a bit.
Well, the thing is about the emulation as well, because I know on the original, like, the At-Games one, the sound was awful on it, wasn't it? And that, emulation's got to be done properly, I think, especially for systems like that where you've got a lot of purists.
It doesn't look bad, you know.
Yeah, it's just got a little board in it. He takes it apart in this video and everything.
Yeah.
And it looks all right,
It
you know.
doesn't look that cheap.
No. Could be a good
Compared to
system,
some of the
you know.
ones you can get in Argos and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, they're normally the At-Games ones, aren't they? So we'll put a link to that YouTube video. I mean, we'll have to do a bit more investigation, Ravi, but
Thanks for that, Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much. And
I'm back.
Welcome back, Joe. And our final letter this week is from Jan Visser, or Jan Visser. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. He said, he showed us up here. He goes, "Hey, boys, I heard you saying you're the only weekly retro gaming podcast, but there is another one I listen to. And I've never skipped an episode." He goes, "It's still impressive, though, that you turn one out every week. I can't imagine what effort it takes. And this is called the NGP podcast. And essentially what these guys do, I mean, I haven't checked them out before, but I'll definitely give them a listen this weekend. And they have one game that they feature every single week on their show."
Dan, we've been invited to go on it. New Gamer Plus.
Oh, have we? Well, I will definitely listen to them this weekend. So you tell us about these guys then.
Well, they invited us to come on, but
Okay.
we need to organise an actual date because it's been crazy here. But what they do is they say, pick a game of your choice,
Right, okay.
and then we'll do a show dedicated
It does
on
sound
that
familiar
game.
now you say it.
Yeah. And
That's quite cool.
yeah, they wanted us to come on. I think they're Australian.
Okay, and they churn this out every week as well.
Yeah. But
Just pick a really obscure game for me, like something nobody's ever heard of. Just be like, yeah, that game.
Yeah. And try and find the ROM. That's part of the
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah, so what we need to do is we need to contact them and then go on their show and somehow mess it up so they can't do one every week. we could take the crown.
Well, we can say we're the only weekly British retro gaming podcast
There we
in Australia. But yeah, I mean, it sounds a great concept. I will be checking them out this weekend. If we need to sort that out and hopefully get on their show.
I
But
bet they're not in Australia.
what do you mean, lads? We're in Lincoln. Yeah, I mean, down the road. But thank you for all your letters this week. If you want to get in touch, all you got to do is email show@theretrohour.com. Now, obviously, you were spending a bit of time on YouTube there. If you were to search this time rather than type in, you'd probably find a guy called the 8-Bit Guy who does a lot of retro videos. We're big fans of his channel, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, this guy's like really detailed to the point that he kind of looks at all the methods of retro brighting stuff
Yeah.
and then finding the best method and like going through every single chemical and doing a strategic kind of look at stuff. But also he's into his old school Macs, which is something we've never really covered on this show. And he's just generally got an amazing channel. Like,
Well, he's at this stage now where he used to be called the iBook guy, didn't he? And he
Yeah.
focused on, you might remember these, Joe, the old Apple iBooks that looked a bit like a toilet seat and they're all multicoloured.
Yeah.
Those ones from the late 90s.
Yeah.
He started buying those up in about 2005-06.
Okay.
And he actually made a business out of selling them, after Apple had discontinued them for a couple
Oh,
of
really?
years. Yeah, so that was kind of he made his channel just to sell stuff on there, didn't he? On eBay, really.
Okay.
He started to get a lot of attention on there now. I think he's going to tell us soon he does YouTube actually full time. Well, actually, the 8-Bit Guy is our special guest on the Retro Hour podcast this week in around 15 minutes from now, because we love getting YouTubers on, because obviously we do get people that might come into our show who are fans of them, and we get a new audience that way. But also, these are people that we watch and we find interesting. They're always really interesting discussions.
yeah, and this guy's like, he's a Commodore fan as well, so we've got to have him on there. But he's also got a channel called 8-Bit Keys, which is all based on music behind video games and keyboards and all the old, Casios and all that stuff, which is really good fun.
And he's got a big following now as well, hasn't he?
500,000 subscribers.
Yeah, which is nuts.
Well, he also does these kind of restoration videos, and I just love watching anything get restored on TV, on MTV or anything. It's just like, wow, look what they can do, and crazy techniques. And he's doing a Commodore Pet at the moment, the original old school one, and it's even got a chassis like a kind of car. You lift it up and then you put
it has.
to get inside. Yeah.
They don't make them like they used to, do they? But I mean, I always see a lot of people, and they recommend retro gaming channels on like forums and stuff. He always seems to get mentioned these days.
Yeah.
So the 8-Bit Guy is going to be our special guest on the Retro Hour in just a bit. Now, of course, we did say that we are maybe Britain's only weekly retro gaming podcast. We couldn't do it every week, though, without your very generous support. Now, obviously, our donations come from all around the world, and we appreciate every single one, however big, however small, every penny, every euro, every dollar, every cent, everything we get goes back into the running of this show and allows us to keep doing this week in, week out, pays for the hosting, helps us go to events and that kind of thing. So thank you for your donations. If you would like to make one, all you have to do is head to our website, theretrohour.com. PayPal button there, Bitcoin, it'll take you 5 seconds, and that will earn you a place in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Now this week, thank you so much to Danny McDermott,
our good friend Marvin Drugsma,
Tobias Lindo,
and Raymond Montalban, who all made donations into the running of the Retro Hour podcast this week. Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.
Now before we get to the 8-Bit Guy, let's go way back in the day. Do you remember episode 1 of the Retro Hour podcast?
No.
You weren't born then.
I wasn't born, apparently.
You didn't exist.
I'll do my impression of episode 1. Hello, welcome to... It was so
I
dry,
never want to listen to that episode ever again.
It's a bit cringy.
We did get a lot of nice comments on that show when we did it, though. Do you remember?
Yeah, it's amazing listening to it back now. And
you guys are so amateurish. Well done.
They're all sympathy comments.
But it was amazing going back and seeing how we've kind of developed from then. And
probably more professional.
The first guy,
probably.
First guy that we had on there was Alistair Brimble, and he's a guy that I've loved his music throughout my whole life. He did Roller Coaster Tycoon
and Mortal Kombat on the Amiga. His
Mortal
music
Kombat,
on that was amazing.
that was it.
And he obviously did the Amiga Works re-release of his music, didn't he? Like a lot of them remastered, remixed. It was a proper album.
Yeah. So he'd taken these kind of 8-bit samples and he'd turned them into a full, beautiful orchestral kind of version of it, and really made these tunes epic.
And Alistair will always have a special place in our heart because he was our first ever guest. Now, remember, when we got him on, we couldn't believe that someone of that caliber was going to come on our podcast.
Yeah.
And we've really got Alistair. If maybe he didn't agree to do that interview at that time, we might not have even bothered doing the show. So
that's it. And he'd just done his Amiga Works Alien Breed one then.
And we met him in Amsterdam, didn't we? The Amiga 30 a few months before. Lovely guy, absolute legend of a bloke. And now he's going to be doing another soundtrack to one of his most famous games, the Driver game.
You see, I think there's going to be some popularity with people that like Alien Breed.
Yeah.
But people that like Driver, it's absolutely huge because you remember GTA, and then Driver was the first kind of 3D.
I hate Driver.
You hated it.
Oh, man. I hated it.
Were you a GTA fan, though? Were you in for the rivalry?
No. So I was, just the tutorial at the start. Just couldn't get past it.
That was one of the most notorious hard tutorials, yeah.
There you
Jeff
go.
never played the game.
I said it. Yeah. No, I played the game, and you know what? I didn't hate the game. That was just a really frustrating... weekend of my life.
Well, I'll say
where my older brother had to do it for me.
The main thing about Driver was the kind of movie feel of it. So they tried to get the idea that people ran out of the way. It was all 70s kind of
that
cop
70s
style,
vibe, really, really good vibe. Really painted the picture really well.
And I think, technology-wise, doing that kind of, the 3D perspective on the PS1, it was quite a feat, wasn't it?
I remember opening official PlayStation magazine, and it was a 2-page spread of Driver, and it just said, Driver coming to PlayStation 1. And it was just like GTA in 3D.
Yeah.
It was just like, what?
Yeah,
kind of thing. And, it lived up to the hype for a game in the late 90s in the PS1.
Well, that came out in 1999, didn't it? And that's the same year that GTA 2 came out. So
by the classic company Reflections as well, they actually brought it onto the PlayStation.
Well, let's talk about the music in it. Oh, yeah.
It's like Starsky and Hutch or something, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So imagine that, like, you know.
Can you imagine that in the background of a porno?
It probably has been. But Alistair Brimble obviously made this music.
Yeah, and I just imagine how he's going to make it much bigger and a grander sound and, you know, totally funky. Imagine if they have a driver vinyl release or something like that.
Well, a lot of games are getting like that, and that would be perfect on vinyl, wouldn't it? With that kind of 70s vibe.
There's such a resurgence of like 8-bit and 16-bit soundtracks getting vinyl, so I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of years that we start really seeing the next kind of like, you know, your PlayStation, your N64 soundtracks kind of getting that revival onto.
Imagine that
onto
PlayStation
vinyl.
Logo in the middle of a vinyl spinning around.
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
yeah, it would be nice.
Now, that is like a porno. But Alistair actually just posted this on his Facebook, didn't he? He just put driver soundtrack coming soon. Little tease.
Yeah, you just know it's going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we'll have to get him back on. You know, maybe his second anniversary. Try and get him back on and talk about
Wonderful.
it. That'd be amazing. So
100 shows later.
Yeah, long now, is it? So yeah, definitely look out for that, Alistair. What a legend. Now, we were talking on the show a couple of weeks ago, obviously, Joe, about your SNES Mini.
Yep, still loving it. Still set it up in the. Still got it set up in the front room.
Nice little package.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for noticing. But obviously, the thing about getting a product like that is it comes in a nice box. It's officially endorsed. You've got the logos on that. I mean, we post a picture on our Facebook of you with your, collection, the old and new. Looks like the original kind of packaging.
You know, and I'm a sucker for that. And, you know, official endorsement and just having it, for me, just anything that kind of comes in a box, big box like that. I mean, it's only a little box, but just having it on my shelf there among my collection, it just looks really nice. And it just kind of, it's proud, you know, it makes me proud to have that as part of my collection kind of thing.
But you can do that with a Raspberry Pi.
But you can't.
Who's that nerd saying that? Well, that's the thing. As we posted about it on our Facebook, and people have been... Now, there's a guy who's done... Wait, I was going to say an article. It's more of a rant, really. On the hardtimes.net. It says, why spend $80 on a SNES Classic when you can install emulators on a Raspberry Pi and never shut the up about it? Now, he's obviously got a bit frustrated at the amount of people commenting that on Facebook posts, on forums and everything. And he essentially, you know, it is quite a brutal rant, saying that people need to stop saying that because it is a completely different experience. And it doesn't make you a better person. Doing it yourself is what he's essentially saying. He said because there are people like you, Joe, who'll actually want to, you know, go out there and just buy a nice finished product rather than doing it yourself.
And you know what? And I can appreciate the Raspberry Pis. One of my best friends has got one. And he brings it over and we play it. And we mainly play arcade games on it. And mainly arcade games which never got any sort of home release, you know, like Cadillacs and Dinosaurs and stuff like that. Alien versus Predator, the arcade game. Actually, I got a SNES release, to correct myself there. Okay. But and we really enjoy it, and it is really cool. But there's just something not quite right about it. You know, just having it there in its little white box, blinking away. It's not official. It's cool. It's a nice vibe. There's a bit of a nostalgia there, but that SNES Mini. There was so much nostalgia with it, and it was just, like I say, it's just really nice having it on your shelf, for God's sake.
I reckon a lot of people that kind of build these Raspberry Pi setups, they put so much effort into the emulators and everything that they have to defend it with all rights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you know,
I mean, you know,
they've invested into it.
In terms of usability, you've got a lot more on a Pi. You can get every game made on there.
Exactly. We're only getting 20 games on this on the SNES Mini, and I get that as well.
But this blog actually, you know, this is kind of the process he talks about. He goes, of course you can do it yourself. Get a Raspberry Pi, find a good emulator online, like RetroPie. Place all your ROMs into /home/pi/retro/ROMs/SNES with your controller configurations in /opt/RetroPie/emulators /Pi SNES. You don't even need a controller. You can run it on a keyboard. And he goes on and on and on. Essentially saying,
bless him,
taking the mick out of all these people that are saying that it is actually quite a laborious process.
But then, to be honest, I think anything's laborious on the Raspberry Pi because it's on Linux and people aren't used to using Linux. Yeah. That's another reason. With the, you know, Nintendo one, you've got a nice little setup system already in there. And you're typing sudo bash app to get all of this.
You turn the SNES Mini on, and it's just like, what language? English. And you're on. You are on. No loading screens, no pissing about, no turning it on and going, is it going to have sound this time? Because that's one of the issues I've had with Raspberry Pis in the past. You turn it on, you load up your ROM, and you're like, wicked, and it's got no sound. Yeah. And you're just like, right, brilliant. Okay,
that's it. Let's
download that again.
The Raspberry Pi was intended to be a computer for kids to learn things on, and education, and a computer, not just a game console. So people like, Raspberry Pi is the way to go.
It comes with all the advantages of a computer, but all the disadvantages as well.
Absolutely. I'll tell you the biggest disadvantage of it, they keep upgrading it, and I've got so many in my drawer now because the new version keeps coming out.
I pulled my number 2 out of my media centre and put my 3 in there. And I'm like, what am I going to do with the 2 now? You know what I mean? I've got my 1 still like gathering dust, waiting for an FTP server or something to be put on it.
Oh, my name's Dan, and I've got all these Raspberry Pis.
I'm on my swag, £25 circuit boards. So, I mean, the Raspberry Pi, don't get me wrong, we love it on this show, and we've talked about it loads, but it's for tinkerers and hackers, you know, someone who just wants an easy plug-and-play system. So I have it with emulators on the Pi that sometimes, you know, the control pad won't get recognised, or just little issues like that you get sometimes.
Absolutely. Or every time you boot up a new game, you're like, how do I insert a coin?
Yeah.
Like, what button is it now?
I don't play games on it. I totally ignore it for gaming because it was just too much of a headache. Even setting up RetroPie, which is like the main thing, it's too much of a headache for me. I use it as a cloud server.
Well, you know, with me though, I enjoy setting up stuff like RetroPie and that, and I've done it before, but then I set it up and I never use it. After that, I'm like,
all these games, which ones to play?
Yeah, I never. There's that many on it. It's like, I guess, because we've talked about this on the show before, it's kind of like having too much choice is a bad thing, because if you probably only got 30 games on there, you're probably more likely to play them than if you've got like 10,000.
Yeah, there is that as well. I find when we do go on the Raspberry Pi, that a lot of the time you just spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes just on a game just to kind of see what it is out of curiosity, where with the SNES Mini, with those 20 games, I'm more likely to spend like an hour or so just playing one. And, you know, I'm casually playing through Final Fantasy 3/6 at the moment, you know, and it's just nice to kind of have that there. And I couldn't imagine myself doing that on a Raspberry Pi.
And I find with the amount of games that I've got on my systems, I'm like, again, I do the thing, I play 2 minutes, but I've spied something else on the list that I'm going to move to next. I'm already thinking of the next game.
You go, oh yeah, we're going to play this game, and you're scrolling through it, and as you're scrolling through it, you see, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom, and you think to yourself, oh, I wonder how that plays on the Raspberry Pi, because that was quite a later arcade game. So you're like, well, how does that run? And before you know it, you only play, you know, whatever you were going to for 2 minutes, because you go, oh, I'll go back to that now.
Then you're not playing a game, you're just doing comparisons.
Yeah,
aren't you? Like,
essentially, absolutely. Yeah.
Played it with, I was around my brother's like about a month ago, and he's got an original Xbox modded with CoinOps 7 or 8 on there. And we were going through, again, it was just seeing how stuff ran on it. But then we got to like N64 stuff. We're trying to play GoldenEye, and it was glitching out all over the place.
Yeah.
And it was like, we're just laughing at it in the end, that experience.
Yeah.
The MAME stuff ran great on it. But when it got to that, we're just like, I wonder what N64 games will work. Then we're not playing them. It's a technical exercise, isn't
Just
it?
see if it works.
The only thing that I found works really well is point and clicks, and that's with DOSBox or Scum. And that's because I can just start one game and then I'm forced to sit there and walk through and do all of the... It's not really a short game. You can play a point and click, you know.
Well, let's finish with something that's going to make Ravi's day, because we have talked about this for a while. One of your favourite games is back, sort of.
Road Rash, yes. I love Road Rash. Fantastic game. Absolutely insane. But I've seen this new video, and it looks pretty brutal, this one does.
Now, this has been, I mean, I've got a feeling this has been around kind of in demo form or videos for at least a year. And this is often posted on like retro gaming Facebook pages and stuff. And I sent to Ravi the other day, and he said, oh, I've seen that before. We didn't know if it was fake or not, did we? But it turns out it's not technically Road Rash.
No, it's not an EA game, is it?
But it is in all but name and license.
But knowing EA these days, thank God it isn't.
Yeah, probably, to be fair.
So it's Road Redemption, the classic game. Road Rash is back with a new name. That's what they're saying. It's back. So I'm a little confused about it. Is it actually, I know it's not EA, but is it actually Road Rash? Has it been developed by anybody who's on the Road Rash team or anything like that? Because people are going, Road Rash is back.
Well, it's weird because there was an official development pictures of a Road Rash that looked totally different to this, which was a concept one, which just looked absolutely crazy. More like Burnout. Yeah, that kind of style.
Okay.
This, I don't know, it's totally out of the blue.
Well, this was a crowdfunder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a while back. I mean, essentially, it's fans of the original game
who
wanted a modern version of Road Rash. Because again, I mean, you've been saying you wanted a new version of Road Rash since, God, as long as I've known you, probably.
Totally.
Like 5 10 years.
I don't know.
Can I have a new copy of Road Rash?
I don't know if I would have imagined it as violently as they have with this, because there seems to me that the element of racing and speed in it is kind of a bit backwards to the fighting. But yeah, I don't know. It's like Road Rash, you could always choose whether to race or fight. Yeah. You know, you could always just bomb it through there.
It was all about the fighting for me. I didn't care where I came.
Same here. I just want to bash someone off with it.
Well, at least I kicked somebody off his bike.
Well, there was also gambling between the games as well, where you could gamble all your points away.
I just remember Gunther. I used to hate him in the first game. I always get Gunther.
Biff.
Yeah, good old Biff. But this, I mean, it's a Unity game. It actually, the initial release of this, now looking at the Wikipedia here and the Steam thing, it initially came out on the 18th of September 2014. So this has been around a few years, but the latest version of this has just come out in the last couple of weeks.
Right.
For why it's getting attention again. And I imagine it was kind of beta versions, and now it's kind of getting towards like
official,
a finished product.
They're saying it's got 4-player co-op as well and split screen and multiplayer stuff. So that could be fun.
I'd love it if the co-op was just like a motorbike with 3 sidecarts.
You're all just climbing on it.
Well, this is available on PS4, Windows, Xbox One, Wii U, Linux. See, I've probably missed it on all these platforms. I've got a Wii U. I've never seen it on the Wii U.
I've not seen that,
according to the Wikipedia page. Now, there might be people listening to this going, "Wait, lad, this came out years ago, boys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've missed out on this." But again, it's just been getting a lot of attention recently. Apparently, the final release is planned on Windows OS 10 and Linux on October 4th, 2017. So that was obviously a couple of weeks ago.
Wow, this is crazy. I may actually have to purchase it tonight and give it a go.
Yeah, so it looks pretty good. I mean, the one thing that threw me off a bit about it is I used to love Road Rash when you got like the chain or the baseball bat. There's guns in this.
Yeah, you can get a double barrel shotgun, which is pretty cool, but
Yeah.
maybe
know
they're
what?
moving with the times.
You
You
know
can get
what
a
I'd
sledgehammer
love?
as well. I mean, who's driving a motorbike with a sledgehammer?
I
Interesting.
love one where you're racing really, really fast and it's like you can't tell anything's going on. You've got to stay on the track, dodge through cars, and then there's someone next to you and you just smack them.
Yeah.
That'll be, and just watch them go off.
That's just
Yeah.
you driving home, isn't
Yeah.
it?
But it's only 15 quid as well. I'm just looking on Steam, so it's not that bad.
Okay,
Good
cool.
stuff.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So if you're doing a download that, it is available now. The final version of it's just come out by the looks of it. So we'll put that in our show notes at theretrohour.com. I'm not that confident they're going to do a final Wii U release, but you never know. Strange.
Well, they've discontinued the Wii U, so I reckon a lot of third-party people are now going to jump on it and just kind of get these smaller titles out there. I've got a
Maybe.
Wii U, so I hope.
Yeah, it'll be cool.
We've all got you got Wii U. as well,
Yeah, I've
haven't
got
you?
Wii U, yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, it is kind of an indie developer's playground now, the Wii U, isn't it? So
Yeah, because I've been using the hacked firmware at the moment, and you can load up loads of stuff on the different channels and all the emulators on there. There's a Vectrex one as well.
you're so dodgy, Ravi.
Dodgy Rabbit.
Right, then,
Handsome
guys,
Joe and Dodgy Rabbit.
that's the nickname now. No suggestions, please. Right then, guys, thank you for checking out episode number 94 of the Retro Hour podcast. We'll be out again, available from all of your favourite podcast clients and theretrohour.com next week. Keep your letters coming in, show@theretrohour.com. And right now, it's time for this week's special guest. Going to get seriously nostalgic. One of our favourite YouTubers, the 8-Bit Guy. And we'll see you next week.
Ciao.
Enjoy.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest, by far one of our favourite YouTubers. Welcome to the show, David, aka the 8-Bit Guy.
Hi, nice to be here.
Yeah, really appreciate you joining us. Now, as I said, Ravi and I are big fans of your YouTube channel, and we'll get more into that in just a moment. But I thought it might be quite nice to get a little bit of background on you. I mean, going all the way back to the start, what was your first computer experience? Where did it all kind of begin for you?
1981, I guess. I was 6 years old. So, yeah, I got a Commodore VIC-20. My brother and my father brought it home, and, I actually still remember plugging it in for the first time and trying to figure out how to use it.
So what kind of stuff were you doing on the VIC-20?
Well, not a lot. I mean, we didn't have any games for it. We didn't have a joystick. All we had was just the computer and the TV. We didn't even have, like, any kind of storage device. We had no cassette drive, no disk drive, no nothing. So the only thing we could really do with it was type in the programs that were listed in the owner's manual and try to figure out how to use BASIC. And that was actually a bit challenging because we didn't really have anybody else to ask for any question. My brother was only 3 years older than me, so he was just as illiterate on them as I was. And I know, like, for the first day or two, we couldn't get any BASIC programs to work, and we couldn't figure out why. And eventually I came home from school, and my brother told me, he's like, I figured it out. And it turns out we didn't realize there was a difference between the letter O and the number 0 on the keyboard. So, like, when we tried to type in a line of BASIC, we would type in 1 O instead of 1 0, and then, and it would say syntax error, like that. So that's how we started. I mean, we pretty much had no knowledge whatsoever. We just trial and error and read the manual, and we figured out how to write some little programs and stuff.
It's crazy, though, that you had no storage method. So that meant, obviously, you were typing a program in and then losing it when you turn the computer off every time.
Yeah, I mean, but they generally weren't particularly long programs, so I guess we didn't really think much of it at the time. We were mostly just experimenting with what we can do, like, oh, look, we can change the screen border color, or, oh, look, I can, type a program that prints hello all down the screen. And, I mean, to us, that was pretty fascinating at the time, so it'd be pretty mundane to a modern computer user, I'm sure. But
would you spend any time in arcades at all?
Not a lot, actually. I mean, we did have them here, but they required quarters, U.S. currency, and we didn't really have a lot of excess pocket change. And I mean, to go into an arcade and really play, you needed like at least a good $10 or $15 of quarters to bring with you. And we just generally rather spend our money on something else. So I don't personally know anybody that went into arcades and played. I mean, I know people did, obviously, but just nobody I knew. We'd rather spend that money on a game for our Atari 2600 or our VIC-20, which we eventually got some games for that as well. And yeah, I mean, I'd rather spend my money on that and then be able to play it as much as I want than to dump $20 into an arcade machine and walk out empty-handed.
And talking about games that you loved as a kid then, which kind of titles did you really enjoy back then, and what kind of have really fun memories for you?
Well, if you're talking the early 80s, most of the games I had were for the Atari 2600, and I seem to recall my favorite game was probably Pitfall. And we had a lot of games, but I probably spent more time playing that one because, a lot of the games on the 2600 back then, they didn't have a lot of variation. Like, if you play Space Invaders, it's the exact same thing, and Pac-Man's pretty much the exact same thing, every time you play it. And Pitfall was a little different because, it was yes, it was technically the same thing, but because the map and the world that you could explore was so big, you tend to forget, what screen comes next. Is it going to be, alligators, or is it going to be the oil slick, or, whatever? And it just, I don't know, I guess it had a little bit more mystery to it.
What was your local computer scene like? Was there kind of local computer shops, and did you go anywhere gaming as a kid or meet up with groups?
There was nothing. I grew up in rural Texas, and we did, we had to drive 30 minutes just to get to the nearest city that might even have like an arcade or a department store or something like that. And, that was where we got our VIC-20 was at a department store. I don't remember which one. It was some kind of like Target or something like that. I don't even remember now. It was Best Electronics, but I think they've been out of business for a long time. Yeah, I remember that. That's what it was now. Anyway, yeah, so there wasn't, if I wanted a game or something, that's where I'd have to get it from. And we didn't know anybody else at the time who even had a computer, so or even a game console for that matter, so it's not like I could share the games with my friends or anything like that.
Well, after the VIC-20, what system did you graduate onto after that then? Which other computers did you go through?
About 2 years later, we got a Commodore 64. So, yeah, quite a big upgrade. And, I used that computer for several years.
It was a great machine, the 64, though, because, imagine coming from, if you didn't have a RAM expansion for the VIC-20, 64K must have seemed like a colossal amount of memory.
Perhaps. I never really noticed or cared that much about the memory. I don't know, that just, as a kid, that just wasn't something that I grasped as being important. Yes, I did write a few basic programs on the VIC-20 that I ended up with the out-of-memory error message at the end. I'm like, I wish I had a few more K of RAM. And obviously I never had that problem with the 64, but, I think the big upgrade for the 64 was just the games were so much better on that machine than the VIC-20. And to be fair, a lot of the good games for the VIC-20 I never had as a kid, mostly because they were cartridge-based games, and we just, we didn't really have the money at the time to go out and buy a lot of cartridge games. And Commodore 64, of course, being more disc-based, and being that we did finally run into some friends who had, at school by this point, who had Commodore 64s, the piracy scene sort of came into effect. And, so we were able to get, a lot of games that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford. And so, so anyway, there was a lot of really good games on the C64 that kept me busy for quite a bit of my youth. I spent more time on the VIC-20 just trying to figure out how it worked and trying to, understand BASIC and stuff like that, because like I said, I didn't really have that many games for it. So that just wasn't something I spent a lot of time doing on that machine.
Well, obviously the Commodore 64 had the legendary SID chip. I mean, were you into computer music back then on the 64?
Not really, and I'll be honest, I didn't even notice that much difference between the musical capabilities at the time. Mm-hmm. But I would point out that, you know, in 1982, most of the games that came out for the C64, they really didn't take advantage of the SID chip the way that later games did. And, you know, in the later part of the 80s, I think once some of the artists had figured out, you know, better ways to you know, get more out of the SID chip. So I think in the early days, I really didn't notice that much difference coming from the VIC-20.
Did you make any films as a kid, or were you interested in acting at all?
I was interested in it, but we didn't have really that capability. My father did have a Super 8 video camera, which recorded on film reels, but it wasn't something that was really available for us to use because it was expensive to use it, and you had to get the film developed, and of course the only way to watch it was to get a film projector and set it up. It was, you know, a real pain. So we didn't get a video camera like, you know, that used like VHS cassette until probably the early 1990s.
Well, did you like kind of keep up with like games and news? I mean, did you buy magazines, or did you watch any like computer or gaming television around there?
I wasn't familiar with any of the television shows at the time, but yes, we did get the magazines. Most of the local department stores had a magazine rack, and there was always at least one or two computer magazines, even in the rural areas of Texas at the time. So yeah, I would pick up the Compute's Gazette magazine, and actually I think the first one we used to get regularly was called Ahoy magazine. I don't know if you guys had that in the UK or not. Yeah, and it was all Commodore based. It was pretty much covered the VIC-20 and the C64.
Well, I know on your channel you cover the Mac quite a lot. I mean, did you kind of get a Mac early on then when it was still 68K, or was it a bit later when it was like PowerPC based?
Okay, so yeah, I'll have to give you a little backstory on that. I didn't even become aware of the Apple brand at all until I got into probably junior high. So this would have been late 1980s, like I guess like 1988, something like that. And we had Apple IIs in the school, and I'd never seen them before because my elementary school actually had Commodore Pets. And so, you know, they seemed a little bit at home to me because, you know, I had the Commodore VIC-20 and later the 64, and they operated kind of the same, even though the Pets were much less graphically sophisticated, but the general operation of them was the same. And so I kind of felt at home when they sat me in front of the Pet. In fact, I actually often knew more than the computer teacher did, even when I was 7 or 8 years old, which was pretty sad. But yeah, when I got into junior high, we had the Apple IIs, and the first time I saw them, my first reaction was, these are the ugliest computers I've ever seen. And then, you know, we sat in front of them, and I'm like, I didn't understand how to operate them because they were very different, and I didn't like them. And, you know, we did have some software we'd run on them. We had green monochrome monitors on all of them, and so never really got to see any color graphics, but I could tell that the sounds were just like beeps and bops, and I despised them. And I remember telling all of my classmates how these machines are horrible. The Commodore 64 is so much better, you know, but nobody at that time had any experience with computers outside of pretty much what they saw in school. I mean, because most of the students didn't have any computer at home. So, and there was no way for me to really show them the difference. So they didn't really pay much attention to me. But yeah, I didn't care much for the Apples. And then when I got into high school, we did have a computer lab with Mac Pluses and Mac SEs. And again, never seen those before. And, you know, I had to do like my school papers and stuff because we had to go into the writing lab. And that's pretty much all we did in there was use MacWrite to write our papers on. And I didn't like the machines, actually. I thought they were, you know, the screens are really small and they were black and white. And but, you know, I noticed all the other students around really seemed to think they were cool because they had the mouse interface, which by that point I had been using GEOS on my Commodore 64. Actually, I think I had a 128 by that point. So I've been using GEOS or some people call it GEOS, or whatever. But anyway, I've been using that for quite some time. So, I mean, I was no stranger to a graphical operating system. And I wasn't that impressed with the Macs. And so I actually kind of had a reputation for being very much against those machines for most of my teenage years.
You were an Apple hater.
So it wasn't until much later that I realized my error. And my error was, like with the Apple IIs, I didn't realize those machines were old. Like, by 1988, the Apple II was pretty long in the tooth. I mean, it was almost 10 years old at that point. And I didn't realize it was a technology from the 70s that we were using. I just, because I didn't have that much sense of passage of time, and the time frame of things at that point. And so, I was comparing my Commodore 64 to a machine that was, a good 5 years older in technology. So it wasn't a really fair comparison to make. And the same with the Mac Pluses. By the time I got to high school, those machines were 6 or 7 years old. So again, I was not being fair with them because I thought they were brand new. Because from my perspective, I just showed up at school. There they were. It's the first time I'd seen them. I thought they were brand new, but apparently the school had them for some time. And looking back, I see it I see them very differently, and now I'm quite fond of the machines and looking at their history. But yeah, at the time, I totally disliked them.
Well, what interested you in the kind of second-hand Apple market? The iBook and then the clamshell one where you started, and then. Well,
I guess I got my interest in the iBook simply because I worked at a computer store in from like 1999 to like 2005, and so I work in it's a very unusual computer store. Actually, it's really kind of hard to explain. It was a store that they tended to buy things either used or they bought like off-lease lots of computers, and they would resell them here locally in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And they hired me as the service manager, so one of my jobs was to get all those computers. Like we'd get a big pallet of them in, and I'd have to go through and test them all and clean them up and label what the specs are on them, and so they could get priced and put out for sale. And we got in the iBooks every now and then, and I really liked them. And I guess my interest, the way I guess you're probably referring to the fact that a long time ago I used to run my own little personal side business selling those computers, and I don't know, almost 10 years ago I wanted an iBook clamshell, the G3. And, those were already kind of obsolete even then, but they were still considered somewhat usable at the time. And I just thought they looked cool, and I wanted one. And I couldn't afford one. My salary was pretty low back then. And so, but I looked on eBay, and I found this person who was selling a lot of them, five clamshells, all supposedly worked, and the deal was pretty good. And I thought to myself, it's like, if I bid this amount on these, I bet you I could sell 4 of those, and I could keep the 5th one for myself for free. Like I essentially get a free laptop. And so I took a risk, and I used my credit card, and I bought them. And sure enough, I actually I put the other 4 on Craigslist. Within a week, I'd sold them all, and I had a free iBook, and I was thrilled. And so I thought to myself, it's like, and I had upgraded the hard drives and memory in all of those because they were really low. And I thought, I wonder if I could do that again, only this time sell all 5. Because I noticed the same guy had another auction, so I did it again, and then I just kept doing it, and eventually I located sellers who would deal with me directly and sell me hundreds of them at a time, and so I got like a business credit line, and I just started buying these things by the hundreds, and then I'd resell them on eBay and Craigslist, and I just like to stick with the one machine, mostly not because I was particularly an iBook fanatic, but just because I realized that by sticking with one machine, I had an infinite supply of parts, and I got really good at taking that one machine apart and putting it back together. And so it was just from a perspective of business sense, it just made sense to stick with the one machine. So it's kind of how I became known as the iBook guy. I mean, it could have just as easily been a PowerBook or a Dell machine or something like that. And the iBooks were popular, and so there were plenty of them around, and so that just worked out well for a business of refurbishing and reselling computers.
Well, I find it really interesting that you said you didn't like the look of the Apples originally, and then when the iBook came around and they got the new designer, Jonathan Ive, and kind of changed their ideas, you're suddenly a fan.
Yeah, the iBook clamshell and the Apple IIe look quite a bit different.
Well, I remember, I think my first laptop was actually an iBook G3, but it was one of the later ones, the snow white ones.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and they were beautiful as well.
Yeah, well, that's what most of my business was with, because I realized pretty early on that the clamshells were becoming obsolete. So, yeah, before, I think like the first lot of like 100 that I bought were actually the white G3, and I think there were some G4 models thrown in there too. And so that's what the bulk of my side business was for like 2 or 3 years, was the white iBook G3s.
Well, around that time, I mean, going back must have been just over 10 years ago, obviously Apple made the big switch from PowerPC to Intel. I mean, did that kind of hurt your business a bit? Nobody wanted the PowerPCs all of a sudden?
Actually, that helped my business because that's one of the reasons why there were so many iBooks that were coming off lease. The companies wanted to get rid of them, and that's why I was able to get them so cheap, is because nobody really wanted them anymore. But, I mean, they still held value because at that time they were still supported. You could still run most any of the Apple software and, all the different, whether it be iTunes or iMovie or, whatever. You could still run the latest version of them. They were still supporting the G4 platform for another couple of years. And so they were really good deals. And at the time, you could surf the internet on those things pretty well. But now you can't. I mean, it's not like the computers have gotten any slower. It's just that the websites have become so complex in the last 10 years that you can't hardly even surf. I mean, you can do like Wikipedia, and that's probably about all you can surf on those old machines now. But yeah, at the time, they were actually a pretty good computer for people to have, and I was able to sell them for, I don't know, I was selling them for like $200 or $300, and that was with a 50% markup on them, and so that was a good deal for people who needed a laptop,
Well, you have done videos in recent years, like showing kind of how usable, PowerPC Macs are. I think, there are still some uses for a G5, for example, one of the higher end ones. I know they obviously use a lot of power in comparison to more modern machines, but they are a bit usable still in many ways, aren't they?
Yeah, well, it depends on what you're using them for. I still use one. In fact, I go to these gaming conventions. In fact, I just got back from New York, and I'm going to Portland, Oregon here next month to do a convention. And, they always give me a auditorium, and they want me to speak in front of people. And one of the things that's kind of like my trademark thing is I actually bring an iBook G4. That's the computer I bring. I have to take that through airport security, and I set it up on the projector, and I run all my slides and everything from it. And, I always crack a joke about, I'm probably the person here, of all the people giving presentations today, I'm probably the person with the oldest computer going to give a presentation with this old iBook G4. And so that's what I do. I still use it to write my scripts. In fact, I even use my clamshell. I've got a couple of those actually, and I'll, when I want to sit down, and it sometimes takes me an hour or two to write out the script for one of my episodes because I have to do some research and think about it, reorient how I want to present the information. And so I just want sometimes to sit down in my easy chair with my laptop, and I'll grab my G3 clamshell because they're real comfortable to type on, and they still work great for doing that.
Well, let's talk about you on YouTube then. What originally inspired you to pick up a camera and think, will people watch this? I'm going to make a video about this. Well,
believe it or not, that started because of my iBook business. So I was selling those on eBay. eBay charges a ridiculous amount of money. They charge like 10% of your sale, plus then PayPal takes a little bit too. And so I wanted to set up a website and sell those computers directly, and I was trying to figure out some way to drive a little bit of traffic to that website so that I could sell computers without having to pay the fees. And so I got the idea. I was like, well, why don't I make some YouTube videos about these computers? And, I'll put a link to my website in there, and, maybe that will drive some traffic to the website. And at the time, it didn't really work. I don't think I ever really got more than 2 or 3 sales on the website, and I don't even know if they came from the YouTube videos or not. And I actually quit doing that business for a while. But people kept watching those videos and kept emailing me asking if I was going to make more. And I'd already had 20 or 30,000 subscribers at that point just watching these videos I did on the iBook, and they kept asking for more. So every now and then when I had some free time, I'd just make another one just for the fun of it. And then somebody told me, he says, David, why don't you monetize your channel? Because I knew a friend at work that had monetized his YouTube channel, and he told me how he's making $15 a month. And I'm like, well, hey, I could use $15 a month. And, I monetized my channel. So I did. And I think the first channel I ended up making $40 or $50. I was like, wow, holy cow. And then I did the math, and I'm like, well, I only have 10 videos, so that's $4 or $5 a video. So, if I had hundreds of these videos, maybe I could make a lot more money. So I just got back to work making more, but I kind of ran out of ideas for iBooks. I mean, there's only so much you can say about an iBook, and then I thought, well, I need a different topic. So I thought, well, I like retro vintage computers. Let me see if there's any interest in that. So I made a few videos on vintage computers, and they were popular. So,
well, did you have these vintage machines then lying around, or did you have to go out and buy them for the channel?
Well, at the time, I had a few. I mean, I'd been collecting them for a while, but I mean, nothing like I have now. I have like, way more of them now. And in the early days, for the first couple of years, I was buying most of them myself. So I would take, I was making, I don't know, after I hit about 100,000 subscribers, I was making several $100s a month on YouTube ads, and I was actually spending most of that income on buying more retro computers so that I could show them on the channel. The good news is now people just send them to me, so I don't. Actually, I still buy some. Actually, I'm looking at 2 or 3 here that I just bought that came in today that I bought on eBay. But people are definitely sending me a lot of stuff now, so I don't have to buy quite as much.
Well, I've noticed on your channels the kind of videos that are really practical do really well. And watching people restore machines and fix them, I think it's a very kind of nice and special feeling watching someone actually care for a computer and bring it out in a really nice quality. Do you kind of feel that these videos do very well?
Well, that's a good question, and so I've spent some time thinking about that myself, because not all of my videos are about restorations, although I think more of them have been about restorations this last year than I think before. I've concentrated more on those because people do seem to like them. And when I really started to think about that, my parents, for example, and even my wife, like watching these shows where they fix up old homes, and I know some people who like watching shows about people fixing up old cars and restoring them. And so I think it's really kind of the same thing. If you kind of have an interest in that, you see this old, neglected, abused machine, and if you have emotional connection to those type of things, and then you kind of want to see, it finally get its I don't know, vindication or whatever, it gets, restored, and finally somebody cares about it again, and I guess that's what it is.
Well, you actually did a series on, you're doing it at the moment, aren't you, the Commodore Pet, like restoring that,
Mm-hmm.
and that must have brought back some, nice memories from your school days and seeing it in good working order again.
And they're really heavy as well. You must have kind of had some good supports on your desk when you put that on.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty sturdy. Yeah, I'm working on the follow-up to that right now. I'm working on the Commodore VIC-20 episode, and so, I'm going to have a lot of childhood memories to throw into this video, along with just, the raw specifications and stuff like that, too, give a little bit of a story behind the machine.
It's actually nice to see, someone from America actually doing a video about Commodore as well. 'Cause they were a very big company over here in the UK and Europe, but obviously, generally in the mainstream, do you find they kind of get forgotten compared to like Apple and Microsoft by most people in America?
Yes, I do. In fact, I mentioned that in my last video, that I feel like most of the historians and stuff, they don't even mention Commodore. You hear Apple, you hear Microsoft, you hear IBM. Those are the 3 companies that all the documentaries and all the magazine articles and everything focus on, and Commodore is sometimes a footnote at best, and that's pretty sad because they were extremely popular here in the United States as well. They were definitely the most popular computer in the early to mid 1980s without question. But the thing is, I think a lot of people have forgotten about them because I think most of the users that had them tended to treat them like game consoles and not so much like computers. And so just like somebody might forget about an old game console they had when they were a kid, the Commodore 64 is kind of considered that way. So,
are there any other tech channels that you really enjoy or have kind of helped influence you?
I don't actually watch that many YouTube channels. In fact, I used to subscribe to about 8 of them, and actually I've unsubscribed from some of them because they got to where their content wasn't very interesting to me anymore. But the only 2 channels I watch regularly, like actually have subscribed to them and actually like watch when a new video comes out, is one of your local fellers, which is TechMoan, and I watch Lazy Game Reviews, and those are really the only 2 that I keep up with. Yeah, I probably like TechMoan better because Lazy Game Reviews tends to focus more on the software, and I'm usually more of a hardware person. I like to see the way stuff was designed, the way the way it works and stuff like that. And TechMoan tends to focus more on that.
Yeah, he's got a fantastic channel, and you've also got another channel called 8-Bit Keys. Do you feel
Correct.
Computer music's kind of been a bit ignored in the past, or technology around it's been ignored?
Ignored?
Or dismissed, maybe?
Part of the reason I was motivated to do that channel was simply because, Actually, I used to play keyboards and synthesizers back in the '90s, but they were, how should we say, the professional stuff, Korgs, Roland, stuff like that. And, I actually lost interest in it. I sold all of my gear in the early 2000s, and I really hadn't played anything for years. And then, when I started doing this retro stuff, I started thinking about some of the keyboards I had as a kid, and I had a bunch of them because it seems like every Christmas I'd get some kind of new Casio or, Yamaha keyboard or something for Christmas, and, I used the heck out of them. I never really learned to play much on them, but I always just liked playing around with them, and they always end up getting, destroyed or whatever, or they break or, anyway. And so, I thought, it's like, well, there's a lot of YouTube channels out there covering all the professional stuff. Nobody's covering the old stuff. And so I thought, well, I could use the same platform as I use on my 8-Bit Guy channel and cover these old keyboards. And I think there's a lot of interesting technological change. I focus on the 80s in my 8-Bit Guy channel. And the reason I focus on the 80s sometimes I'll do stuff from the 90s and even later, but the reason I like the 80s so much is because the amount of change during that decade was just dramatic. Mm-hmm. Like if you look at computers in 1980 versus 1989, in that 10-year period, there's just an enormous change in what we would consider, a computer to be. And it was the same was true with synthesizers. And so that's kind of why I focus on the 1980s with that channel, because I like to show the enormous change from the sound technology in these keyboards from 1980 through the 90s. And anyway, so that's kind of why I explore that.
I think you make an interesting point there as well, because, like you said, a few minutes ago when we were talking about your school days, you mentioned that you're using Apple and Commodore machines that were maybe 5 or 6 years old. And it was such a big change in that decade. But now, I think my main PC at home is about 7 years old now, and it copes completely fine. It's people forget, I think, just how much change did happen in the 80s and the to the mid 90s, really.
Yeah, exactly. And the computer that I use for my editing, I actually just upgraded recently, and it's still a 5-year-old machine. Yeah. and yet it's not. I don't consider it to be obsolete. But yeah, if you go back to the 80s, a 5-year-old machine was obsolete. It was almost like a dinosaur, But yeah, I think the rate of change has slowed dramatically in the last 10 or 15 years. Sure, they're getting faster and, more RAM, and the operating systems are getting better. But fundamentally speaking, if you put a 10-year-old computer in front of somebody and one that's of today, they operate more or less the same. You're not going to look at one and say, ooh, look at the great graphics this one has compared to that one. They're more or less the same. The only thing that's really changed is the newer ones are a little bit thinner, lighter weight, and the battery life's better, the CPU's a little faster, but generally it's the same computer. And yeah, but back in the 80s, boy, it was, every time I upgraded, like from the VIC-20 to the 64 and then later to the Amiga, it was just a dramatic change. It was such an exciting thing to open a new computer and put your first game in and see what it could do, because it was just going to blow your mind away. It was so much better than the previous model.
And it was expensive as well, because it's every time you got a new computer, most of the peripherals that you had for the old one didn't work with it, and you'd have to buy everything again back then.
Yeah,
crazy.
Exactly.
Well, I've noticed you've done recent videos on what you've been sent, and kind of in some of them you're saying, don't send me too much stuff, guys. So I guess you've kind of been sent some crazy stuff, and you're running out of space at the moment.
Well, I am running out of space, and so I have narrowed down the amount of things that I'm accepting. But the real problem that I was addressing in that video was I've had about a dozen people, and I think most of these were young boys, probably 10 to 13 years old. I'm not making that up, because in general they would actually tell me how old they were. I just don't remember each specific case. But they would ask me if they could donate something to me. And I would, I'm always trying to be really polite with these people. And I'd be like, oh, I really appreciate that offer, but, I don't really have any use for that. And then they would ask me for my address anyway. And they'd say, well, I'd tell them, well, look, I really don't need that thing. And they're like, yeah, but I want to send you, this other thing, or I got a surprise I'm going to send you you're really going to like, or maybe I'll find something later for you, and I just want to have your address. And of course, the thing about it is my address is not a secret. There's 15 different ways you could look up my address if you really wanted to know what it was, because it's, It's not like I'm a secret agent or something like that. So, you know, just to stop the argument, I just give them my address. And then, you know, a few days later, I'll get these packages in the mail from them, and it's the exact thing I told them I didn't want. And then half the time there's some letter saying, will you please give a shout out to my YouTube channel that has 15 subscribers on it, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, it's really annoying because I don't want to be a jerk to these people, but, you know, I can't just show that kind of stuff. I mean, I've been sent like envelopes of broken RAM modules, you know, an old Pentium 4 processor from like 5 years ago that's with the pins all broke on the bottom, and I've been sent some floppy disks that were, I don't know, they found in a trash can somewhere that had some writing on them, and there was nothing like, you know, it's like somebody's spreadsheet or something on them. I'm like, what am I going to do with this? You know, I don't have any use for this. And, you know, there's, you know, any number of things like that I've been sent, and I'm not going to even show it on camera. You know, my viewers don't want to see me open that kind of stuff, and I'm sure it's like not going to give a shout out to their YouTube channel. Well, and, you know, I get a lot of requests for shout-outs to YouTube channels, by the way. I mean, probably daily, 3 or 4 requests for that. And it's not something I really do in my channel anyway, but for some reason people seem to think that I should be like their source of advertising. But in each and every one of those cases, I always go look at their YouTube channel to see, you know, what they're all about. And in the vast majority of cases, they've got like 15 or 20 subscribers, and it's very clear why, and I will usually write them back, and I'm pretty blunt about it, and I'll be like, well, look, I looked at your channel, and, you know, I mean, there's a reason you only have 15 subscribers on your channel. It's because I see you've got like 15 videos that are 5 minutes long each, and it looks like you spent about 5 minutes on each of those videos producing them, and so, you know, that's the reason why, you know, nobody wants to watch it. I said, I could send you 500,000 people over to your channel, and not a single one of them is going to subscribe, and they're just going to be mad at me for sending them over there. So I always tell them, you know, maybe you should work a little bit harder on your content. And then I'll tell them, you know, I spend about 30 to 40 hours for every 15-minute video I produce. Mm-hmm. So if, you know, you want the subscribers, you're going to have to invest the time. And when you invest the time, the subscribers will come on their own. You don't need me to send them over there to your channel.
Well, I noticed you mentioned how long it takes to kind of make the videos, and you have another job. You're not just a YouTuber full time. So how do you...
actually, I am.
You are now? Okay. And
as of February this year, I quit my job to do YouTube full time.
Well, I was going to ask how do you find the time, but yeah.
Well, yeah, so when I used to do a regular job, well, for one thing, I did have one advantage. With the job I worked, it was an IT job, but I was kind of fortunate in that it was one of those where I wasn't really all that busy on most days. I would say most days I had literally like 3 or 4 hours of time just sitting around waiting for the phone to ring, essentially, for someone to have a problem. I mean, there were obviously days there were crises, and I was busy for days on end with, you know, no free time. But, you know, normally speaking, it was not unusual for me to have 2 or 3 hours of free time at work to just work on whatever I wanted to. So I would while I was at work, I would research for my videos. I would, work on some of the scripting. I would maybe, if I needed to draw some diagrams or something, I could do that on my computer at work or whatever, which would, help me get the... You know, in other words, there'd be less to do when I would actually get home and film the episodes. But, you know, I was only producing about maybe 2 videos a month when I was working. And now I'm doing like 5 to 6 videos a month now that I'm doing it full time. So I am producing more. Yeah, I went full time in February. And it was mostly thanks to Patreon. I started a Patreon account. Several people had suggested that to me late last year, and I really didn't know if that many people would support me, but they did. The numbers rose fairly quickly, and before long I was making as much money on YouTube and Patreon as I was at my job, so I just decided it was time to move on, and so that's what I do.
Well, are there any machines you've always wanted to kind of get your hands on and do a video about that are just really rare or really hard to get hold of?
Oh, sure. In fact, I'm looking at one right now that I just unboxed a little while ago that I bought on eBay. I've been looking for it for ages, and they don't even show up on eBay. It's called a Laser Compact XT.
Wow. Never heard of that.
And, actually, I remember seeing them as a kid. Sears used to sell them, and they sold 2 machines. They sold the Laser 128, which was a clone of the Apple II, And then they had the Laser Compact XT, which looked exactly the same, but it was the motherboard was different, and it was a clone of the IBM PC. Now, I've had the Apple II clone version for a while, and I wanted to do a video on it, and I thought, well, it wouldn't be right to do a video on this without having the matching XT version, because I swear, you put these computers right next to each other, they look identical, except that on the front, one says Laser XT, and the other one says Laser 128. But I've been wanting to find the XT version for a long time, and two of them popped up on eBay recently, and both of them were missing keys on the keyboard, which is so irritating because I'm like, well, where am I ever going to find keys for those? But I noticed that neither one of them were missing the same keys. So I ended up buying both of them, and I just got one in today. I'll have the other one in later this week, and then I should be able, hopefully, between the two of them, restore one complete working XT. And yeah, these machines are rarer than hen's teeth. They're really hard to find.
Talking about your collection, what's kind of the prized jewel of your collection then? Like, say, hypothetically, if you could only save one system over everything else, what would it be?
Man, well, I'd probably save the machine that I have the most sentimental value towards, which is my Commodore 64C.
Nice.
But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's any one machine. It's not like, I don't really actually have any machines that are supremely valuable. I mean, the Commodore Pet is probably the most valuable one that I have. That's worth maybe $400 or something like that. Yeah, I mean, if I had like a Commodore 65 or some, unusual thing like that, I guess, that would be something to talk about. But like I said, I've got some machines that are fairly rare, but they're not particularly valuable. Because they're rare because nobody knows about them and nobody cares.
Yeah, Commodore 65s go for a ridiculous price, don't they?
Well, the 65 is rare, but people want them, so that's why they cost so much.
Well, one thing I love on your channel that was totally unusual was you built that Apple Cat Tower. Do you plan on doing any more kind of retro computer cat conversions?
What was it for people that didn't see this? Explain what it was.
It was one of those Apple iMacs with the back or eMac, I think that's what it was called.
No, it was a Blueberry iMac is what it was, the G3 model.
Yeah, that was it, and it was a cat tower with that on top, and the cat could sit inside. It was amazing.
An actual cat.
Yeah.
Well, I took the CRT out and I put a padding inside, and then I mounted it on a pedestal with a scratching post underneath it. And actually, I don't have that anymore though, because unfortunately, our dog thought that was like a it was like a fire hydrant to him. He wanted to pee on that, and he peed on it so many times that the wood just rotted out, and I didn't feel like rebuilding it, so I ended up just throwing it out. And I built that other cat tower. I don't know if you saw.
Yeah, I saw that
use
as
any
well.
retro computer parts, but the cats really like that one much better anyway. So
it's cool what people do. I mean, I've seen, people like repurposing them into like fish bowl or fish tanks and
Sure.
like PowerMac G5s into like benches and that kind of thing. I mean, are you into like mods and that kind of stuff? Would you like to do any more of that?
Well, it's interesting sometimes. I actually get a lot of emails about that, and I don't mind so much if someone's going to take like an iMac G3 and do that, because those are so ubiquitous, and I mean you can literally find them in like trash dumpsters, and people just throw them away because they don't even have enough value. Like you see them on eBay, but nobody will even buy them because they cost more to ship than what people will bid on them for. And so I guess I don't mind when somebody takes one of those, but I get a lot of people like they picked up some a rare vintage machine. Like I've had people ask me like, hey, I picked up this Commodore SX64 and I want to turn it into a fish tank or something. And I'm like, what? Why would you do that? Somebody had a VT100 terminal they picked up the other day. Those are really rare, and they were asking me about gutting it and putting a PC motherboard in there and everything. And again, I was like, that's such a rare piece of hardware to find in good condition these days. I couldn't possibly condone, tearing that machine apart.
It's when you get the guys who are like, sanding down a Commodore 65 to make like a work surface or a bench or something, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So I guess a lot of it just depends on how rare the machine is as to whether or not I could condone that kind of thing. And I don't know. I did the cat thing. That was probably, I guess that's the only time I've ever really done that.
Well, I'm going to try and make one and see what my cat thinks. He may enjoy it. Do you have any future plans for your channel as well?
No, not at this point. I'm just going to keep doing the thing I'm doing, and people seem to like it, and channel's pretty successful right now, and it's still growing. I just got a notification from YouTube that they're sending me my second plaque for my 8-Bit Keys channel, so because that channel continues to grow as well. So yeah, I've got a list of episodes. Every time I think of an idea for an episode, I open my phone and type it in there and write up a paragraph or something. So because sometimes I'll forget. And so when I get ready to make another episode, I kind of look through my phone and say, okay, let's see, do I want to make that one? Do I want to make that one? Or sometimes I want to do one, and I'm like, well, I can't make that one yet because I still haven't found, part number XYZ that I need to complete that episode. So a lot of them are on kind of indefinite hold until I can find some rare piece of hardware or something like that. But nevertheless, I've got like 100 scripts, at least in some form of completion waiting for me to do, and I keep thinking of new ones all the time. So I don't think I'm going to run out of ideas anytime soon. I've got a lot of stuff planned.
So people do want to find you on YouTube. It's just the 8-Bit Guy. I mean, do you tweet or do you Facebook and all that as well?
I have a Facebook page and a website and YouTube. I don't have a Twitter or Google Plus or any of that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, David, really appreciate you joining us this week. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Cheers. Thanks
for having me on.